Hi, my name is Max. Welcome to this video walkthrough of my summative assignment for the Wwise module as part of Thinkspace Education's Sound Design for Video Games Master's degree. In this walkthrough, I'll be discussing my process of asset design, management and implementation for the open source game Cube using Audiokinetic's middleware, Wwise. I began by analysing the sound design and implementation of video games of a similar genre to Cube. The game reminded me of early to mid-90s MS-DOS era shooters such as Doom, Quake and Duke Nukem, with its fast-paced action and its dark fantasy sci-fi level and character designs. Because of this, I wanted to replicate the audio from these games, which were of a low quality due to the memory restrictions of their time. I had the privilege of speaking to two veterans of this era of games, Jamie Scott and Brian Schmidt, in a post on a Game Audio Facebook group. They both informed me that audio at the time was rendered to approximately 8 bits and 11 kHz, and that assets were heavily compressed using one of the first ever plugins, Waves L1. This was in order to increase the signal-to-noise ratio, as high did the noise floors are inherent to 8-bit audio. I took this on board and created my assets using the same processing methods. For this assignment, I was heavily inspired by the sound effects in Quake, especially the shotgun blast sound, the gore sound from when an enemy explodes, and the ogre's grunt. These heavily inspired my audio design. I loved how crunchy and abrasive these sounds were, while also sounding big and action-packed. I decided to design all my sounds to replicate the same mood as the audio from Quake. I began the design process by initially profiling the game to see which events were being called during moments of play. I then created a detailed asset list, which listed the event names, number of variations, sound SFX object to be named in Wwise, and the naming conventions for the audio files themselves. I decided to work on the map MPSP1 and create sounds for the ogre and the knight. I made few alterations to this map by removing and duplicating monsters and setting up reverb zones so that my map was ready to be populated with Wwise events. During the asset creation process, I fed all audio through a master bus with the D-Blue Crusher plugin, which reduced the sample rate and bit depth in real time, rather than create the assets and then resample them afterwards. This was because I'd noticed how the characteristics of the sound effects change when rendered to a lower quality. Once all my assets were ready, I created a hierarchy of actor mixers in Wwise and populated these with the relevant switch, blend, sequence and random containers. My assets were then split into items, main character, monsters and weapons. Splitting the assets into groups meant that blanket effects and behaviours could easily be added and tweaked to each group at once, as you'd want these all to behave in a similar way. I followed the Wwise 101 course and hooked up everything that was covered in the tutorials, such as the footstep switch groups, the action of the shotgun blast pump in and out and shotgun shells containers to the fire shotgun player event, the randomization of the playback of the 3D position path of the shotgun shell heads and tails, and the setting up of the game-defined aux reverbs. An example of triggering multiple actions from one event can be found in the death player event, which, once posted, plays the death and pain impact sounds, stops the low health breathing loop and sets the game state from alive to dead, which in turn is hooked up to fade out and lower the pitch of the heartbeat and low health rumble loops. When the enemies shoot their respective ice or fireballs, I wanted the player to be aware when a near miss happens. To do this, I added distance attenuation to both the ice and the fireballs. For the ice balls, I created the Doppler effect game parameter, which I hooked up to the attenuation cone of the ice ball, meaning that as the ice ball passes the player, the pitch gradually lowers. For the fireball, I created a low rumble loop, which would only be heard at a short distance from the player. I also automated a high-pass filter to decrease in value at close proximity to accentuate the whoosh of the fireball as it passes. When creating the pain sounds for the main character, I was inspired by Quake's system of playing more distressed vocalizations as the player gets closer to death. To implement this idea in Wwise, I created a switch group for various levels of pain relative to the player's health. I hooked these up to change at different health values and assigned the necessary pain vocalizations to each switch, ranging from soft to critical. When testing the pane impact audio in the game, I noticed that it didn't quite cut through the mix enough for it to be immediately noticed by the player, a very important factor in fast-paced shooters such as this. To solve this, I created a damage bus, which was hooked up to the pane impact random container and would affect the volume RTPC found in the environmental bus. I made sure any vocalizations and shotgun sounds would override this, as I didn't want these to duck in volume as well. I made use of the Soundcaster feature to make sure assets of a similar nature were consistent in volume with each other, such as all of my footstep material assets, the shotgun blasts, and the enemy vocals. As optimization was a crucial aspect of my research, which I adhered to for both stylistic and technical reasons, I focused on making the CPU usage of this game as low as possible without compromising the integrity of my implementation. I created a conversion share set which would convert all files in the project from .wav to .ogg. As my assets were already crushed, this conversion had little to no sonic effect on the game's audio. In his comments on my Facebook post mentioned in the research, Brian Schmidt also mentioned another facet of why old games sound like old games, aside from just the audio quality. Schmidt mentioned that the restrictions in polyphony in games of that era also added to the retro characteristic. In a way, because of the limited polyphony, a lot of older games have much cleaner mixes. I achieved this by limiting the maximum number of certain instances to play globally to 3, with any new instances being culled. In particular, the enemy grunt events needed to be limited, as these events are commonly played in unison in the game, for example when a door opens and multiple enemies react to seeing you all at once. Although this wasn't strictly coherent with the much harsher restrictions of polyphony for games of this era, it still served its purpose for lowering the voice count and CPU usage, as well as resulting in a cleaner mix. To optimize the processor CPU usage, I followed the Wwise 101 course and lowered the volume threshold to -50 and the max voice instances to 40, meaning that voices that are playing quieter than -50 decibels or exceeding the instance count of 40 will be culled. Following my research, I pushed all gunfire and vocals, arguably the most important sounds in a fast-paced shooter, to the forefront of my mix. Finally, I profiled the game to assure that the voice counts, CPU usage, and volume were correct. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough of my audio design and implementation process for the Wwise open source game Cube. Thanks for watching.